We still don't know how many Starship flights are needed to fully refuel this lunar Starship. It won't work. There's no way it can work, at least not within the scheduled time frame or time horizon. China has an ambitious but somewhat opaque program, since we only get information when something notable occurs.
Welcome back, Claudiu. Great to have you on our podcast again.
Great to be back. Thanks for inviting me. Always enjoy talking about space.
That's exactly what we'll do from now on. This time it's going to be a podcast that will also be edited. It's something new for us too, and I'd like us to get straight to the point. This time he says we should start with Starship because we've seen things happening with Starship. But I read somewhere that some people are also complaining that maybe Starship is promising too much, that maybe there were mistakes from the very beginning. Please tell us what's happening now with Starship.
Yes, there's also the theory that maybe Starship isn't such a good idea after all, or that it's not what Elon Musk promised from the beginning. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because Starship is still a prototype that's still evolving, and indeed we've seen that maybe it's not evolving the way we'd like it to evolve. Let's say we got over the first failures of the first 2 or 3 launches pretty easily, after which things seemed to go well for Starship, and now the last 2 launches. Let's say we were a bit disappointed because the second stage was lost pretty quickly, faster than we expected, both us and the people at SpaceX and Elon Musk. And then of course the questions arise. Was there a fundamental mistake in the rocket's design? Will Starship be what was promised, especially since some rumors have appeared? I don't know how true they are. That basically, the mass that Starship can lift to low Earth orbit won't be 100 tons but 50 tons. So a significant decrease to half of the promised value. It remains to be seen because we still haven't had a Starship rocket in orbit. All 8 test flights were planned to be suborbital flights. That means it reached space at about 200 kilometers, so above the 100-kilometer limit. From the start, it was clear we didn't want it to stay in orbit, likely because we weren't sure we could bring it back down, and we don't want to leave the rocket in orbit without being able to control it. And so all the flights were redesigned to be suborbital, and they were for various reasons. Either that's how things turned out, or it exploded and the flight became much shorter.
But let's get to the essence here. So, Starship essentially has 2 stages. Not the heavy booster, the first and second stage, and then a payload or whatever needs to be carried further into space.
Exactly, and basically Starship is a completely new vehicle. If SpaceX delivers as promised, Elon Musk could completely change the paradigm of orbital launches. I mean, we'll have completely different things to talk about, to launch and so on.
But why? Because he promised to bring the heavy booster back to Earth and also bring the second stage back to Earth so that they can be reused.
Yes, it's a fully reusable system. That's the theory. You don't know how it will evolve. But what does SpaceX promise us? That it will be a fully reusable system. And that's a very important aspect. It will be cheap. So a launch, we don't know exactly yet. It's all just estimates, but I don't want to give numbers because we're still pretty much at the beginning. But it will be very, very cheap because being completely reusable, basically it will only cost the fuel and, well, some basic maintenance. I said shuttles because I'm thinking of the American space shuttle from the 1980s, which was over 40 years ago, 45 years ago, and it promised the same thing. I remember I used to read the books that were written about the space shuttle, and it was promised like this: the space shuttle. It's the end of classic rockets. We won't have Delta, Atlas rockets and so on anymore. Everything will be launched with the space shuttle and everything will be fine. It wasn't like that, and Star is now facing, after 45 years, exactly the same problems. It has problems with the heat shield, meaning the shield that should protect the upper stage when re-entering the atmosphere. It's made with ceramic tiles just like the space shuttle, and there are problems with the adhesion, with sticking the tiles to the rocket's body so that they protect it. Of course, that's where the similarities to the space shuttle stop, since Star is entirely different. It's a new vehicle built with other materials and for a different purpose. Yes, so things still aren't going very well, and
the space shuttle, yes. They thought once you succeeded, nothing else needed to change. That was it. And what turned out in practice was that every time it came back, the shields had to be checked, tiles had to be replaced, something else had to be done, and in the end, the costs still remained high. Let's get back to Starship and take it step by step. So we have the heavy booster.
Surprisingly, the heavy booster is working well. They managed several times, about 3 times, to recover the first stage, and not like Falcon 9, which usually lands on the ground or on a barge, this heavy booster. The first stage comes back to the launch tower, which catches it with some robotic arms, which is spectacular also from an engineering point of view. I find it remarkable because of the tower's precise construction, even with its great height. That, with a precision of a few centimeters, so that those robotic arms can grab it, so it comes exactly to the fixed point. This is a remarkable achievement by those at SpaceX, and from this point of view, it's a success. The first stage, so there don't seem to be any problems here. At one point there was a problem with the tower, because the launch damaged some antennas on the tower, and then they weren't sure if they could maintain communications between the tower and the rocket, but things were resolved here pretty quickly, because the first stage doesn't come in at such a high speed as the second stage does, so the mechanical and thermal stress isn't as great. The issues with the rocket structure and the problems with engine ignition with the sloshing of the fuel inside were solved by SpaceX. Well, the big problem is the very high amount of energy it has. When the second stage re-enters the atmosphere from orbit, it travels at very high speed, storing a large amount of energy equal to its mass times the square of its orbital velocity. And dissipation is a problem, it seems, and then all sorts of problems appeared. It was able to be brought back by the atmosphere above those Indians, and so in a kind of controlled descent. Yes, I mean, they didn't land at a fixed point, it wasn't recovered, but somehow it reached the area where it was supposed to arrive. This happened during flights 5, 6, and 4, so before the last 2 flights, which had problems, but major damage to the structure of the second stage was still identified. So things aren't exactly great when it comes to the second stage, because there are problems with the heat shield, there are mechanical issues, and so on. That's the big problem, bringing an upper stage back from orbit to Earth in good condition, good enough that you can refill it with fuel and launch it again in a few hours. That's the major challenge for SpaceX right now.
And the thing is that Elon Musk has some strong beliefs, right? He promised to do something in the Artemis program in I don't know what. When does her Starship have to be ready?
Here we have a problem, I'm telling you, a major scheduling issue, because time is passing and the Artemis 2 mission is approaching, which will take place in February 2026, still next year. Things are going well from this point of view for National Aeronautics and Space Administration Kulnia, meaning National Aeronautics and Space Administration is assembling the Space Launch System rocket. We'll see if it flies again or not. The administration at National Aeronautics and Space Administration needs to change, and we'll see 2 administrations and planning. But things seem to be going well for the Artemis 2 mission. Artemis 2 only means orbiting the moon and returning the Space Launch System, because the Orion capsule coming back to Earth is not involved. Starship comes into play in Artemis 3, which should take place in 2027, and I could bet with anyone that this won't happen in 2027 for 2 reasons, or for several reasons. Most are related to SpaceX, but not exclusively to SpaceX.
Why does Starship have to be used in Artemis 3? What's its role?
SpaceX has to prepare another type of Starship, the Lunar Starship, which is different from the one on Earth. But is there a spacecraft to send to lunar orbit, and this Lunar Starship will take the astronauts from lunar orbit where they arrive? With the Orion capsule from National Aeronautics and Space Administration on the surface of the moon, it is basically a lunar lander for the crew, because Orion cannot reach the moon's surface. And back to orbit, back to Earth, and then it stays in lunar orbit, and from lunar orbit the astronauts have to descend with something to the surface with a vehicle. That vehicle will be the Starship Human Landing System, or Human Landing System. And in order to send that Lunar Starship into lunar orbit, it has to be launched from Earth. It must enter Earth's orbit, then travel to the moon. However, it needs refueling before leaving Earth's orbit for the moon. Here's the big problem and dilemma for both National Aeronautics and Space Administration and SpaceX. We still don't know how many Starship flights are needed to fully refuel this Lunar Starship. There are some estimates that kind of scare me, because the estimates say that it's needed between, it's not exactly known, 15 and 20 launches. A successful Starship which reaches orbit, which performs a fuel transfer, and this test of transferring fuel from one Starship to another obviously hasn't been done yet, and National Aeronautics and Space Administration hopes that SpaceX will be able to do this year, even though no Starship has reached orbit yet. We're already, look, in 2025 we've entered well into 2025, and by 2027, by the time we need to have the lunar landing with Artemis 3, there are only 2 years left. In 2 years, you have to launch, I don't know, about 30 to 40 Starships to reach orbit, let's say 10 for testing and 20 actually for the mission itself. Attention, National Aeronautics and Space Administration might also require a test before sending people with this Artemis, with this lunar Starship. They might ask for an uncrewed test. Just to see if the system, if all the lab things work, we'll have to wait and see what happens. If I were to make a bet, I'd say that after Artemis 2, if it still takes place, the whole Artemis program will probably change and National Aeronautics and Space Administration will look for another option. Because it's pretty clear to me that this approach with Starship and the oranges won't work. There's no way it can work, at least not within the scheduled time frame or time horizon. Now there are other options as well. It's not just SpaceX working on lunar landers. The people at Blue Origin are also working on a lunar lander, Blue Moon. It's called, let's not confuse it with Blue Ghost. That's why I mentioned Blue Ghost. That's from Firefly Aerospace, which is uncrewed, and unfortunately it will only be ready for Artemis 5 sometime around the year 2030. Now they could probably hurry up a bit, but you can't really rush these things when it comes to landers with a human crew. That's why I'm a bit skeptical that we'll have, I'm not just a bit skeptical, I'm skeptical that we'll have a crewed lunar landing in 2027 under the current conditions.
Can you briefly explain what will happen in Artemis 2?
Artemis 2 is basically a repeat of the Artemis I mission, meaning an Orion capsule will be sent, but this time in Artemis 2, unlike Artemis Tănăselia, there will also be astronauts on board. We will have 4 astronauts who will orbit the moon. It will be a shorter mission than Artemis 1, similar to Apollo 8 if we remember what happened in 1968, but just like that, with a capsule they orbited the moon and the crew came back to Earth. The goal is to test that indeed the Orion capsule works and that it can maintain the necessary conditions for a crewed mission. And only after Artemis 2 is successfully completed. We can consider sending people to the moon, but a crewed mission is more complex and takes longer. That's why this preliminary test is necessary. There were also problems here with the thermal short on Artemis 1 and Artemis Y. National Aeronautics and Space Administration noticed that the thermal short is much more worn out, much more... how should I call it here?
Activated.
Damaged.
Damaged? No, yes, I can say.
The thermal short is much more damaged than initially estimated. It is still not known why this is happening, meaning the physical causes behind this additional corrosion after exposure to the atmosphere have not yet been understood. To avoid issues for the crew, there's no longer time to replace the short already installed on the Artemis 2 capsule. National Aeronautics and Space Administration may use a different re-entry trajectory for the capsule to protect its thermal shield, but for Artemis 3 we will have a completely different short, newer, more modern and more robust, it seems, for the crew's safety.
Now, if America delays its moon landing plans, it's not a chance for China?
Yes, it is. And with every delay or with every month that America is late, things get interesting. I'm saying this because China has an ambitious program that's somewhat opaque, as we only get information when something notable happens. And we have to connect the dots of information that we gather from China. But from how things look, China has a chance somewhere around the year 2030. They say 2029, 2030, but to be realistic, I would say 2030, 2032. If the United States doesn't return to the moon by 2032, it might be that the Chinese will do it as taikonauts because things move a bit faster there, they don't stumble as much. In committees and decisions like this, things move faster and their program is more coherent, unlike in the United States where the private sector complicates things. Everything is centralized and their program reminds me of Apollo, with the state controlling everything. And things move forward with contracts without tenders and, things like that. They are now building the launchers. They've tested the engines. The engines have been successfully tested, and they even tested them on another rocket that flew into orbit, so they're working on a rocket. I tend to say that their architecture makes more sense than that of the Artemis program. I mean, it's more straightforward. It resembles the architecture of the Apollo program more. It's obvious they took inspiration from there, so things seem to be going well now. China lacks the know-how, the experience in such long-duration missions far from Earth, but they recently presented the suits for such astronauts, which will be used for these missions. As we say, things with rockets seem to be working, and they have experience with new launchers, powerful launchers, so I don't see any reason to worry about the progress of China's missions. Gesture to the moon. However, we have every reason to be concerned. Not about the United States' success in reaching the moon again, but about their ability to stay in this program they've set for themselves. I mean, on the current trajectory, with the data we have now and seeing what's happening with Starship, it's hard to believe they'll be able to meet this deadline. I'm also worried. The White House and National Aeronautics and Space Administration leadership changes are concerning, because we don't know what ideas the new National Aeronautics and Space Administration will bring and what they want to change. And if you keep changing things along the way, and you keep changing them every year, 2 years, 3 years, it's hard to make progress in one direction. I mean, it wasn't like that in the Apollo program. In the Apollo program, they knew from the start what they wanted, they knew exactly how things were done, and in the end, they got them done. I don't think we've fully thought this through. There was the Constellation program, which National Aeronautics and Space Administration gave up on. Then they started the Artemis program, which is great, but they're using old hardware from the Space Shuttle era. I mean, things are moving slowly, they're moving forward, but they're moving slowly.
Claudiu, thank you very much for coming. I think we should get together again and keep talking about this and other things.
With great pleasure, anytime.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
If you like this edited podcast format, please let me know in the comments. I will make more until next time. I'm Christian Presura, Physics Explained. You're cool. Best wishes. Goodbye.